Welcome back, and we're going to get into our discussion of our next religious tradition, which is Taoism. The first thing that we should mention about this tradition is that it can be spelled with a T as in Tom or a D as in dog. It's the same tradition, and the pronunciation is also the same. The T makes more of a soft T or a D sound, so I'll often say Taoism. The reason for the two spellings is because there are different ways to translate the characters of the original languages originating from China into the letters that we're familiar with, the alphabet from A to Z. All right, let's talk about Taoism. One difference between Taoism and other traditions that we've talked about is tolerance, especially if you consider Western traditions. Take Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, for instance. It's very difficult to be more than one of those simultaneously. It would be very rare for a Christian to simultaneously be Jewish. It would be very difficult for someone to simultaneously be a practitioner of the Islamic faith, to be Muslim, and to also be Jewish, let's say. But some of these Eastern traditions, so-called Eastern traditions, this isn't the case. You can simultaneously be a Taoist and also be a Buddhist, or be a Taoist and also be a Confucian practitioner. We'll talk about Confucianism soon as well. So here's a story to exemplify that tolerance. It's called The Emperor and the Buddhist Scholar. So an emperor seeks out the sage wisdom of a scholar. The scholar arrives, and this scholar is wearing these really interesting shoes. Now, they didn't exactly look like that. That's just an image I pulled off the web to make the point. But these shoes that this scholar had were clearly Confucian shoes. So the emperor is very confused, saying, wait a second, I thought you were a scholar in Buddhism. Why are you wearing these Confucian shoes? The Buddhist scholar says nothing and points to his cap. And the cap that he's wearing is a Taoist cap. So you see that symbol on the band of the cap, which is the yin-yang symbol, or sometimes in the West it's mispronounced as yang, but a more accurate pronunciation would be yang, yin and yang. We'll talk about that symbol in this section and the next, but you see it both in Confucianism and in Taoism. But in this case, the cap signifies Confucianism. So the emperor is very confused. You say, I thought you were a Buddhist scholar. I asked you about your shoes, which are Confucius. You point to your cap, which is Taoist. What's going on? Again, the scholar says nothing and instead points to his scarf, which is a Buddhist scarf. And the lesson, or the moral of the story, is that someone can consistently be a practitioner of all three of these traditions. You could simultaneously be a Buddhist, a Taoist, and a follower of Confucius. There's a saying that one is a Confucian at work because Confucianism is about order, social order among at work or at home or in society. You're a Taoist on the weekend, meaning that when you have more free time to philosophize about life or how you live your life, it would be good to follow the Taoist tradition, and that you're a Buddhist at death because of the belief in reincarnation. But that's the saying or a joke. Confucian at work, Taoist on the weekend, Buddhist at death. So let's talk about that symbol that's on that cap. So this is the yin yang symbol, and the lighter part is associated with yang. The darker black part is associated with yin. These are interconnected opposites, but they are complementary. So one is positive and one's negative. So they have all these opposites: bright versus dark. Warmth. What's the opposite of warmth? That would be coolness or being cold. Dry on the one hand versus damp. Sun. This is a little bit more difficult, but if you have to imagine what's the opposite of the sun, well, the sun is bright and light. Well, what's maybe empty space would be the opposite of sun, but in this tradition, it's actually the earth or the moon. Masculinity is associated with yang, and femininity associated with yin. Now you might see maybe there's some sexism here. Wow, so masculinity and men are associated with positivity and brightness and warmth, and women and femininity, they're associated with darkness and negativity. Well, that might be part of what's going on. We've talked about how, unfortunately, many traditions in their history do have elements of sexism, but luckily that's changing over time. But the way that I would think about these two differences, the way I would think about the positive and the negative, is not morally good and morally bad, or not good versus evil. Instead, think about photographs. Think about photography. So now we have digital photography, but before we did, when we had analog photography, we would take photos on film. And I hope that some of you remember taking photos on film and not just on your devices. And you would shoot a roll of film, and then you would take the film to go get developed. And sometimes it used to take a while, and you would need a dark room, but eventually you could go to a drugstore like a CVS or a Long's Drugs or a Walgreens, and you give it to them, and they would process it in maybe 24 hours or 5 hours, and eventually it was 1 hour photo development. And so you get a package back when you went to get your photos, and you would have this nice package of photos. But then think about when you took all the photos out, there was still something in the package. What was left in there was this smaller package, and it looks kind of like film, but those are the negatives, right? And the negatives are quite interesting. If you look at them, they just look really dark, not particularly interesting. But if you hold up a negative up to the light, what would you see? You would see the complementary inverse image of the photograph. So if there was writing on someone's shirt, right? If someone had a name brand shirt and the logo said Nike, let's say, or Adidas, or whatever, in the negative, it would be the mirror image. It would be the reverse or the inverse, or the complementary form or version of that photograph. So in one sense, the two kind of mirror each other, and they fit together like puzzle pieces. So that's the way to think about this relationship between yin and yang. It's not so much morally good, morally bad, or evil. It's two sides of a coin. And in the image here, you've got these the light side fitting symmetrically, perfectly aligned, perfectly complementing the other side. Now you might be wondering about the dots. Why is there a dark dot in the lighter part and a white dot in the darker part? Well, this is to signify that rarely is anything in this world 100% yang. So maybe the sun is totally represents yang. And maybe pure, empty, dark space would represent yin. But for the most part, living things, inanimate objects, and even human beings we might have more yang than yin, or vice versa, but we have both characteristics as part of our lives. So there's a brightness to most things and most people, but there can be a darkness. There, you know, there can be a very very masculine person, but then there might be times where um, that masculinity isn't overly present, and vice versa. So that's what's going on with this symbol. Veneration of elders is a very important part of this tradition. And it's also an important aspect of other traditions too. So we might describe it as respect for your parents or respect for your elders. In the Christian tradition and in the Jewish tradition and in the Islamic faith as well, there is an imperative, a command to honor your mother and father. So we have the same thing here. And in fact, the name of the founder of Taoism is named Lao Tzu, and that actually translates roughly to old master or old boy. So whereas in American culture today, getting older is something that a lot of people dread, and the people that we hold in highest esteem in the United States are young, beautiful people, the people that are on the magazines at the grocery store. In this culture, especially the traditionally, this culture, it's really people who have lived a lot of years, who have accumulated knowledge and more importantly wisdom. And so to be old is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, and people would look up to you and respect you and listen to what you have to say. So whereas today in California, life really begins, when you're 18 or 20 or 21 or something like that. But traditionally in Chinese culture, it's really in later in life, in the 60s. And it's not mom and dad who dominate the home, it's grandma and grandpa. So they would often live in the house with mom and dad and with the children, and they were the ones that called the shots. Notice that's very different. There are a lot of families in American culture where grandma and grandpa might be living in the house, so that's common in a lot of the cultures that you might be a part of or that someone might be a part of. But it still can be rare that they're calling the shots. We think of them as, they're just kind of being taken care of by mom and dad who are really running the show. Yeah, so Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, was known as Old Master or Old Boy. And in general, children are obligated to support their parents and the elderly in general. So in terms of the timeline here, Taoism and Confucianism developed roughly about the same time as Buddhism and Jainism started to split away from Hinduism. And in the West, this is when many of the famous ancient Greek philosophers, they were starting to think up their big philosophical notions and ideas. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, not much longer after the development of these traditions. Some say that Lao Tzu and Confucius, the founder of Confucianism, that they met. Which came first, Confucianism or Taoism? It's not exactly clear. You have some people, they'll say Confucianism came a little bit before. That might be a little bit more of the popular answer to that question. But some argued that they met. Some say that Lao Tzu was born 50 years before Confucianism. Now, Lao Tzu's job was actually a very influential part of his life. So here's the image I want you to think about as we talk about Lao Tzu's job. So this is an image from a movie called Office Space. And this is a particular character who is kind of introverted and quiet and really gets the short end of the stick in this Office Space comedy. The summary of the movie is that you've got office workers who are working for a tech company, kind of like in a Silicon Valley like scenario, and their jobs are mindless, and they're in cubicles and they're staring at their computers all day, filling out paperwork and meaningless reports, and it's not creative and it's monotonous, and they just have kind of lost touch with their humanity. And so this Milton character, I believe that's his name, he kind of represents that office worker. So Lao Tzu had a similar sort of job. He was the keeper of the royal archives for the government, and his job was extremely boring, extremely monotonous. He had very little power. He in Office Space, there are 7 bosses above these workers. It's very convoluted. It's very much bureaucratic, and things are inefficient, and it's really just mindless, boring, the kind of job that just sucks the life out of you. So Lao Tzu had a job like this, and one day he gets fed up and he just leaves. And that's similar to the lead character in Office Space. Just decides one day, I'm over this. I'm not going to do it anymore. So what Lao Tzu does is leaves the office, doesn't really tell anyone, and he gets on an animal and rides it to the border of China. So this is if you're wondering about historically where are we set here, it's during the dynasty period of Chinese history, the Chao dynasty. So he's on his way. He's just, I'm going to get out of this city and get out of this country. So he goes to the border of China, and he's about to leave, but something gets in his way. There's a border guard who stops him and says, I'm not going to let you leave. Somehow, this border guard recognizes something special in Lao Tzu. Recognizes that he's wise or that he's important. Something inside him tells him to not let this person go. So the border guard makes a deal with Lao Tzu and says, I'll let you go. I will let you pass. But before you do, I want you to write down the sum of your wisdom. Once you do that, I'll let you go. And that's exactly what Lao Tzu did. He wrote down the sum of all his wisdom. So this is, I forgot to do this cool image of him kind of on his journey, gets to the border. That's exactly what he does. He writes down the sum of his wisdom, and that wisdom is contained in the main text of Taoism, which is called the Tao Te Ching, spelled like that. It is arguably the most influential text in China. Guess what number 2 is? Well, it's a preview of what we're going to be doing next. The text of Confucianism, the Analects, or the teachings of Confucius. So the Tao Te Ching literally translates to the classic of the way and its power or virtue. That's a mouthful. Doesn't really clarify what the text is about. Its length, if you had to guess, do you think it's about the length of the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or the Vedas? It's only about 5,000 words, which is 15 pages double spaced or less. So many of you have written essays that are longer than this text. And in fact, that's the text that, since it's so short, I'm going to have you read it. It won't take very long. And it is quite powerful and interesting. And There are it's the way that it's written. You can pick up little tidbits of wisdom along the way. You don't have to wait until the end to get the big idea. So you'll notice that as you read that text. It's been translated more than any other book in the world except for one, and that is the Bible. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the big ideas and themes in this text. So we can summarize them into a short list. So here's number 1. There is a natural way to the universe. 2, you should accept this way. So this is big idea number 1 and number 2. Big idea number 1, there is this natural order or way to the universe. And the second big idea, we had better accept it. So the way or the order of the universe, the way things naturally are, that is the Tao. So Taoism focuses on this natural progression and way of the universe. That's what the Tao is, the way of the universe, nature's way, or just the way. And here we have the character for the Tao. It's a mysterious, indefinable force. The Tao is the basic unity or unit or impetus behind the universe. Often the analogy of a river or current is given for the Tao. Here's a line translated in English from the Tao Te Ching. Tao in the world is like a river flowing home to the sea. Tao follows what is natural. So if you think of this river or maybe even better, the current of a river, we can do one of two things. We can go with the current, kind of go with the flow, as a saying that we have goes, or we can fight the current. But fighting that current is futile. Even if you have some sort of technology, even if you have a canoe with an oar, or even if you have a boat that has a propeller, if the current is strong enough, and believe you me, the current of nature is stronger than even any technological device that we have developed, the current will sweep you away. I mean, think about nature and its grandness, whether it be an ice age, whether it be an asteroid hitting the Earth, or the explosion of the sun, which is predicted to happen in 4 or 5 billion years. The way of the universe, that's what's going to win in the end. So it's better to go along for the ride than fight it. So that ties in to this next idea. So instead of theme number 3, I call this 2A. So if we go back to 2, which is accept the way of the universe, part of accepting and embracing that way is to be very careful with technology. Technology in general tends to go against the Tao. So that image in the background is, I pulled it from a movie called Prometheus, which is, I believe, the prequel to the movie Alien. Here's a line from the Tao Te Ching, one of my favorite, probably my favorite, I'll just go ahead and say it. Though there are machines that can work 10 to 100 times faster than man, they are not needed. So this was written 2,500 years ago, and it's saying that no matter how many advances of technology we make, and this is the foresight of Lao Tzu and of Taoism in general, no matter how advanced our technology gets, how efficient it gets, we don't really need them to thrive as human beings. And in fact, they can often get in the way. So there are extreme interpretations of Taoism where we could try to live a life where we completely reject technology. And, we live as human beings might have when we were hunter-gatherers or even before. There are other interpretations of Taoism where we don't completely give up and reject technology. We just are very mindful of the lure of it and the danger and the sort of consequences that can come along with it. So, for instance, just off the top of my head, 2 very negative potential consequences of technology include a nuclear holocaust where our weaponry gets so advanced that the missile silos are opened up, and one country releases a volley of nuclear warheads to another country, and they respond in kind, and we blow ourselves up as a species. And of course, another catastrophic potential consequence of technology is global climate change as a result of things like the burning of fossil fuels. Here are 4 images here, and each of them I selected to represent some form of technology. So you might pause the lecture here and try to figure out what's going on in each of these 4 images. Well, in the top left, you might say, I know what that is. That is birth control. So medicine is represented in bottom right, but birth control is arguably a particular kind of medicine. Medicine counts as technology, and the reason why I picked that upper left slide is because if you want to make a case for the benefit of technology, you might talk about birth control as an example of that. So setting aside the moral debate between pro-life and pro-choice for a moment, if you look at countries where women have access to reproductive health, where they have access to things like birth control, there is a high correlation. So we have to be careful by assuming there's a causation, but there's a high correlation between women having control of their bodies, particularly when it comes to having children, and equality. So there's almost a 1-to-1 correlation between gender equality and women's rights when it comes to reproductive health. So medicine in general, of course, is another example of the benefit of technology. If we gave up technology altogether, our lives would probably almost definitely, invariably, be much shorter, and we would suffer a lot more. So you can see that this is a difficult debate. We'll have to think about this carefully and critically. Top right, that image is supposed to represent agriculture. With agriculture came ended times of famine and starvation was less of an issue. We didn't have to be nomadic. We didn't have to be hunter-gatherers. We could stay in one place. We could build cities, and that led to advances in society, including academic and intellectual, extra time for those sorts of pursuits. In fact, there's an explosion in religion altogether at the advent of technology, and the theory is people were kind of busy just trying to stay alive, but once we invented agriculture, there was more time to participate in things like religion. But with agriculture, we get kind of this automation of food processing, and I'll give you examples in a little bit about the negative aspect of that. Now, the bottom left image, that is probably the most difficult to decipher. Now we see there's some kind of industry going on the shore, and then there looks like some body of water, maybe a lake or an ocean. That's actually a shot from a plane or a drone or a helicopter or something like that. That's a shot of a desalinization plant. So that is technology that removes the salt from ocean water and produces clean drinking water. What's interesting about technology is it can cause problems like pollution, like global climate change, and then instead of pulling the reins on our use of technology, some people argue we should use technology to solve the problems of technology. Now, is this foolishness or is this the way to go? So we created a problem with technology. Agriculture led to a population explosion. There's so many people, not enough clean drinking water. In California, we have a drought. So maybe the solution is we'll use this technology to get water from the ocean. There's plenty of water in the ocean. It's just full of salt, we got to get the salt out of it, among other things. But this takes energy, and it's not a silver bullet. Here's another line from the Tao Te Ching. Do you think you can take over the universe and improve it? I do not think it can be done. The universe is sacred. If you try to change it, you will ruin it. And if Lao Tzu were here today, what he might say is this is precisely what humanity has tried to do. We've tried to tame nature with science and technology. And in the short run, this has solved a lot of problems. But in the long run, we're going to be worse off. We're trying to tame nature. We're trying to manipulate nature. Lao Tzu is skeptical about whether or not in the end we will win out. And in our attempt, we will ruin it. And that was the plot of this film, this Disney film, which some of you might remember, WALL-E, where humanity is forced to leave the planet because we have trashed and polluted it so much. And that whole movie, I think, represents some of the themes of Taoism. Human beings leave on this special spaceship and they go away from the Earth because of the danger of the radiation. But everyone, the technology is so good, we don't even have to leave a chair. We kind of just float around on these hover chairs, and the chairs do everything from it. They have entertainment screens, and they feed us, the bathroom, and we don't really have to do anything. And the ship is self-sufficient. But once it starts breaking down, problems start to arise, and that's part of the conflict of the film. So, population explosion, technology, is it the key to the good life, or is it the key to our demise? So this is a recent traffic jam in Beijing, China. The traffic jam was so big it lasted 5 days long. And believe it or not, that's a 50-lane freeway. 50-lane traffic jam. You can go ahead and try to count all those lanes, and they'll add up to 50 or close to that. Is this what we have? Pollution and traffic, one of the byproducts of our advances. So that's a negative. That's a drawback of it. Do the benefits outweigh the drawbacks? That's the question I want you to think about and try to answer for yourself. Again, I'm not here to give you an answer. I don't have an answer. I just want you to think about it. Come to your own conclusions. So I got a lot of really good videos in this section of the class, and I hope there's a link handy. I'll always try to get the link to you somewhere. This first one is a short video about how our lives have changed over the last decade or decade and a half. Our smartphone obsession, it seems to be infiltrating all aspects of our lives. Smartphones, they're just everywhere. In social engagements, when we're in bed, even children have them. Even if you are trying to get away from the fast-paced worlds, from the technological world, you're trying to go on a hike. Even if you go to Yosemite now, people have their phones and they're using it for GPS, and they're not looking at these beautiful, majestic scenes with their eyes. They're looking at them through these small screens. And it seems to be infiltrating our lives so much to the point that we might be worse off for them, but we still keep buying them and we're obsessed with them. So I remember when I was in college, I went to UC Santa Barbara and I participated in a study abroad program. And I went to the Caribbean. I went to a very small island in the Caribbean called Barbados. And I went there in 2003. And there was email at the time, and there was cameras, and there were phones, but the phones were not smart. And no one really bought their phone because we wouldn't have a service. Our cell phone company, wouldn't, you would have to pay an arm and a leg to be able to use your cell phone in another country. So we just left it behind. And, I sent some emails every once in a while back and forth. People didn't really have laptops. They were just kind of desktop. We didn't really have a computer in our house. And I cherish that time. I communicated with my friends and family. I sent an email every once in a while, but I really felt like I was on the other side of the world. I felt away. I really felt abroad. But now you can go study abroad and you could Skype or video chat with everyone back home, and you don't miss a beat. And I think there's something sad about that. So when you watch that smartphone obsession video, ask yourself, is this my life, where the phones are everywhere? At a concert, people aren't watching, they're not enjoying the entertainment isn't enough. You have to capture it with your phone and take selfies, and we're ignoring each other. We get together for a meal, and it's like we're there, but we're not there. We're physically there, but our minds are somewhere else. I've heard of, I've done this with some of my friends. I've heard some of my students say that they will, if they go out to dinner with a big group, they'll play this game. It's a sort of game, I guess, where everyone puts their phone in the middle of the table, and you're not allowed to touch it until the meal is over. And if you do use your phone, then you have to buy a round of drinks, or the whole meal is on you. Now, in the second video, this is comedian Louie C.K, which a lot of you might be familiar with. He has a lot of points about cell phones. He thinks that they are problematic, especially for children. They're toxic for children, he says. It's leading to more bullying, because before cell phones, you couldn't bully over text or over Snap or over Twitter or Facebook. If someone's going to bully someone, it had to be face-to-face, and you could see the cringing on the other kid's face, and there was some feedback there. You made kids laugh, which you might have liked, but then you saw you were hurt. You were face to face. You saw that you were hurting someone. But now it's so much easier. You can do it anonymously. It's so much easier to bully someone. You can kind of get away with it. You can be meaner than you would face to face, and so there's more bullying. So the joke on the Louie C.K. bit is that kids used to be like, oh, that doesn't feel good to make fun of someone. But then when you call someone fat, let's say over a text or a Snap, you're so far removed that you're kind of like, yum, that felt good. Yeah, give me some more. In the China Apple Store video, it's a video, I believe it's the first or one of the first Apple stores that opened up in China, which is ironic because the assembly of the phones are there. So a country where they'd make a lot or most or all of the phones didn't have Apple stores. And so this was the unveiling of this new Apple store. And if you didn't know what the commercial was for, you might think they were unveiling the cure for cancer. People are so happy, and there's old people and young people, and it looks like this great thing is it's going to fix all your problems. But it's just a phone, right? And our obsession with these cell phones is having other negative consequences. The brightest minds that are graduating from these top engineering universities, they're not going as much to help us solve the problems of the world, whether it be hunger or climate change. The most talent from these schools, they're going to work for tech companies like Apple and Google and Twitter and Facebook, because that's where the money is. So we're losing our best engineers to smartphones, and that's not all bad, certainly not, but it's something to think about. I got more videos for you. So this really represents where we're at as a society. You have a group of young people going to a baseball game, and there is supposed to be this entertainment. It's supposed to entertain you for like 3 hours. Allegedly, baseball is America's pastime, something that's been entertaining us for over 100 years, but now it doesn't seem to be exciting enough. People are bored, and they need, if there's any downtime in life, it must be filled with, don't worry about downtime. We've got the solution. You've got the downtime filler in your pocket. And it's more and more and more. It used to be one person had a smartphone and you borrow it, or you go on it kind of seldomly, and then you go on it only when you're alone. But now it's perfectly acceptable just to kind of be on it all the time. And then the obsession with the selfies and posting pictures of you having a good time, and the Instagramming of the food and the hot dog and the churro, and it creates this kind of fake life that you put out there, and everyone is putting out these fake lives, and it's kind of depressing the people who are looking at these timelines or streams or feeds, because we look and we look, oh my gosh, this person's so happy, they're having so much fun at this baseball game, look at them on this trip, look at them with their significant other, but that's not real. So it makes me or you or everyone feel bad because we look at that and say, wow, I want that. But believe it or not, most of the time the people who took these photos, they're just as unhappy with their lives and unsatisfied, but they're just creating this fake moment. There's this artist, Eric Pickersgill, in the next video, and his photography is quite interesting. So he might take a picture of the women at the baseball game, the Diamondbacks game. It would be exactly the setup of what you saw, except he would remove everyone's phone, and see how ridiculous it would be if everyone just kind of looking at their hand, right? Or looking at their hand, which would have been a selfie. Two people in bed, back to back, and they're just kind of staring off into nothingness like zombies. This is what this technology has done. It's kind of making us out to be much more like zombies. So he and his wife, they're physically as close as they could be, right? They are touching. You can't get closer than that. But simultaneously, the two couldn't be further apart. Think about the paradox there. They are as close as could be, but at the same time, as far away from each other as they could be. Close physically, on other planets mentally. Couldn't be further mentally from each other. These phones, these gadgets, these devices, it's a constant distraction as well. So it is just perpetuating this short attention span that we all seem to have developed. We used to be able to watch a movie for 2 hours. Now that's too long. We used to be able to watch an hour drama. That's too long. A 30-minute or 22-minute comedy. That's too long. YouTube videos, a couple minutes long. That's too long. And now we've gotten down to just a few seconds, short clips of a Vine clip or a short video on some other social media. And another downside is we can reach out to people all the time, but then think about we're always reachable. So in terms of work, everyone takes their work or school home with them, because I can just text you or call you, and you've always got that availability next to you. That's not the way it used to be. When you were in your car, you just were away from the world, and now you're constantly connected. And there's actually some countries where laws are being passed where it'll be illegal for your boss to email you or contact you after working hours, because people, their work is being taken home with them, and they're just working all the time. I talked about the technological development of agriculture. So in the next video, the Samsara montage, this is a clip from a powerful film that doesn't really have a normal storyline. It's kind of a montage of just different aspects of humanity set to music. And so in this one, they focus on the food production in the 21st century. It's very much factory farming. It's automated. It's almost like the workers are drones. There's nothing unique. The food is all the same. It seems to be soulless and frozen. The animals don't seem to be treated ethically. They have less space. It's an artificial environment. And so the way that we used to eat is we would, pick fresh fruit from a garden, or we would gather nuts, and there was a uniqueness to these meals that we would produce, and what we were putting in our bodies to nourish ourselves has now become all the same. It's injected with preservatives and just high degree. Even if you, probably it's more conspiracy theory to work about, preservatives and that long list of at the end of ingredients of things that you can't pronounce, haven't heard of. Maybe those things are safe and they're regulated by the government. Set that aside. But the food that we eat just has a high degree of fat, saturated fat, trans fat, grams of sugar. So that is something that any nutritionist could tell you. Comparing the past with the future is our next slide here. Here's what our smartphone obsession looks like in 26 photos. So whether it be the way we interacted with a visit of a president or the Pope is completely changed. In the past, people would be just looking at this important figure, President Clinton or the Pope of the past. And now everyone just pulls out their phones. And again, we're not enjoying the moment. We're just looking at these screens. We want to capture it, but it's almost like we're missing the most important part. Yes, you can look at the photos later, but you missed out what the photos were of in the first place. The way we interact on a subway is like zombies. These things are just everywhere. They've infiltrated all aspects of society. Here we have a famous couple. You might recognize that is a Beatle. That is John Lennon with his... so he was assassinated, and that's Yoko Ono, who's still alive today. And you can see he's reading about Taoism. It says Lao Tzu there. So part of this rejection of technology is a much simpler life. That's part of this second theme. The way that we ought to live. So there is a moral imperative of this Taoism. The way we ought to live, our food should be plain, not automated, factory farmed, and good. Their clothes, fine but simple. Homes, secure, happy in their ways. They live in sight of their neighbors. And it gets poetic here. And the crowing cocks and barking dogs are heard across the way. So the noises that you hear are of nature, and they're not of leaf blowers and cars going by and traffic and buzzing from the noise of our devices being charged. So here's a story, a short clip of a woman who lives in Thailand. Her name is Tong Mai, and she at one point was married and living in the city and made lots of money and got kind of in that materialistic, consumeristic pattern. Make money, spend it, make money, spend it. And even when she had all this money, she just wasn't happy. There was something missing in her life. So she decided to leave the city. Her husband couldn't believe it. She was craving this contact with a simpler life, with a village life, where you live with a smaller group of people, and it's not in this fast-paced, industrial city, urban lifestyle. She had much less money, but she was much happier. And it seems like she has a stronger connection with the people and the earth. Now, I don't want to sell this as completely hunky-dory and rosy. You're leaving the comforts of that city, right, and the conveniences. Hospitals are further away, so we should try to keep that in mind. But is there something to this Taoism, this lifestyle? That's what I want you to think about. And I sometimes and some days I tend to think that there's something going on here. It's very hard to leave the comforts that we enjoy, but if we did, would we be better off? We kind of assume it would be worse, but maybe that's presumptuous of us. Tong Mai in the video makes the point that people will work for decades, 20, 30 years, 2-3 decades, save up all this money, and what do? They buy one home, right? In the United States, a 30-year mortgage, that's how long it takes. You make payments over 30 years to pay off a house. And at the end of that, you own one house. But what she does is she makes simple homes out of this kind of mud clay stuff out of the earth, and she's made 100 of them. And she made one by herself, and she, instead of 1 to 2 decades to build, or to build and own one of these things, it takes 1 to 2 months. So her recommendation is simplify your lifestyle and you'll be better off. And that's also the motto of this next short clip, Minimalism on the Rise in Japan. So in the video it says it is inspired by Zen Buddhism, and themes in Buddhism are consistent with Taoism. So this being careful about the power of desire and living a balanced lifestyle where you're not overindulging, that's the way to go. So you have people in this short video where instead of living a very fast-paced consumeristic lifestyle like we have in the United States and in parts of Japan, get rid of all of the stuff in your house, and believe it or not, you might end up being better and happier. So this person says there are 3 shirts, 4 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, and altogether 150 possessions total. And at least the reports from these people living this sort of lifestyle, this minimalistic lifestyle, is they're much more content. And that's what's going on in Taoism. So if Lao Tzu were here, he'd say, I could have told you this 2,500 years ago, to go for this sort of simple, minimalistic lifestyle. This idea isn't confined to the East. Here's Henry David Thoreau, an American essayist. He says here, I make myself rich by making my wants few. So if you think about wants or desires as holes in the ground or holes in the sand at the beach, what happens is you fill one hole, you satisfy one desire, but then another desire pops up, and sometimes it can be deeper. You play this game long enough, you have these really deep holes that you'll never be able to fill. So that's one. So if happiness is having all of those holes filled, it can be very difficult if you have too many or too deep of holes. So a smarter way to fill up all those holes is just to change your attitude so that you have fewer desires and thus fewer deeper holes, and it'll be easier to fill them. It's kind of a shortcut, more efficient way to achieve happiness. Check out this comic. Patient says to the doctor, Doctor, I don't feel well. I'm not sure why. Here's the prescription from the doctor, and it's very much consistent with the themes of Taoism. Doctor says to the patient, I want you to meditate for 20 minutes twice a day, exercise for at least 30 minutes a day, avoid processed foods, eat plenty of organic fruits and vegetables, spend more time in nature, less indoors, stop worrying about things you can't control, ditch your TV, come back in 3 weeks. And so kind of getting back to basics, getting away from the rat race, the fast-paced life, probably could solve a lot of the medical issues that we might go in to get remedied by modern medicine. A lot of times it's the stress that's aggravating and producing these symptoms and these anxiety disorders and depression, and our diets as well, and our overworked, lack of sleep, eating the processed foods. And again, I'll point out that there is something to the opposite of all those things. Eating junk food can be so pleasurable every once in a while. And, not exercising feels good, right? Being lazy feels good. Meditating, it takes so much discipline, it's boring. Organic food, yeah, I'd love to eat it, but it's not around, it's not as accessible, it's more expensive. I'd love to spend more time outdoors, but I live in an urban area, and, it's hot out there, it's cold out there, it's humid out there. It's hard to not worry about the things that, there's just things that inundate us. I like my TV. I love Netflix. I love Hulu. I love movies. It's hard to not overdo it. So to anyone out there that's, kind of worried, Ryan's kind of pushing this sort of agenda. First of all, I'm just presenting the view of a tradition, this religious tradition. And second of all, I'm trying to also be aware that this either isn't easy, or it just might not be the way to go. It absolutely might not be the way to go. Um, just different recipes for life. You guys you might be aware of those TED Talks. TED is a kind of a presentation organization that puts out these talks and puts them on the web. TED is TED is for technology, education, and design. But now the talks are on all sorts of things beyond that. And one of the talks is from a psychologist on happiness. And there's a recipe for happiness, which includes this prescription: being grateful for what you have. Just saying 3 things you're grateful. Write them down or say them out loud each day. Journaling, exercise, meditation, random acts of kindness. This is something simple that we have to do. Happiness is not about fame, power, fortune, and possessions. It's more about relationships with other people, being grateful, and having an outlet for the stimuli in our life. So 2A was being careful about technology, kind of spilled over into 2B and 2C, living simply, and here we have a simple government. So for Lao Tzu, the ideal government is that of a small village. A saying in Taoism is that just like a small fish can be overcooked, so too can a government easily become too big. So he was very much anti-bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is an inefficient, overly bloated government. He just like his job, he recognized the inefficiency, and he opted for a streamlined, simple government. Here he says, as I mentioned, ruling the country is like cooking a small fish. In other words, it's easy to overdo either. That's 2B, simple government. So 2A was be careful of technology, simple government for 2B, and in 2C, live simply, not for fame or power. Here he says, too much success, it's not an advantage. Claim wealth and titles, and this got cut off, and disaster will follow. Have little and gain. So the minimalistic lifestyle we saw in the video, that's the way to go. Have much and be confused. Too many objects and too many possessions and decisions, it's really overwhelming. We don't have time for all these things. These advertisements almost lure us into believing that we wouldn't be happy without them, we got to have them. But it's really a misdirection and an illusion. If you never saw the ad, you probably wouldn't have the desire for it. It's like going into a mall or a big store. Maybe you go in with somebody else who needs something, and all of a sudden you come out and you bought all these things, you didn't realize that you wanted them. People focus too much on the acquisitions of good, power, and not enough of enriching their lives in simplicity. So this is a character from a Netflix original called House of Cards. This is the actor's Kevin Spacey, and he plays a politician named Frank Underwood. And if anyone is obsessed with fame and power, especially power, it's that character. He is ruthless and he will do anything. Think of the worst things a human being could do. None of it is beyond him on his quest for power. And just think about celebrity life. It seems to be happy. It seems these people that seem to have it all, and then all these stories come out about how they have addictions, or they're abusing drugs or alcohol, and the relationships fall apart, and they're depressed and anxious. So if you follow that link, you can see there a funny GIF or GIF, whatever it's called, of Miley Cyrus at an old MTV Awards or MTV Music Awards or Movie Awards, and that kind of represents the pinnacle of being showy and ostentatious, and not being humble, not living the life of a Taoist. So many of the more extreme people who pursue Taoism, they live that life of asceticism we saw in Buddhism and Jainism, of that monk lifestyle. So we're getting close to wrapping it up here. Theme number 3 is life is the greatest position. So again, theme number 1 is that nature has a way. Theme number 2 is that we should embrace it by being careful with technology, having a simple government, living simply, and avoiding fame and power. Theme number 3 is life is the greatest possession. So this is where Taoism took an interesting turn. Maybe got away from its roots. What happened is, after Lao Tzu had passed, this is a few decades or even centuries after his passing, a group of Taoists got kind of interested in extending life as much as they could. If nature is the way to go, or our lives are part of nature, we should do what we can to keep that life going. Recognize that death, when it happens, is a natural part of life, but that's no reason that we shouldn't try to preserve life and extend our life. Well, their reasoning was, well, how do you preserve a fish? Well, you do it with salt back in the way. Before refrigerators, if you wanted to preserve meat or fish, you would salt it, and that would make it last longer. Well, could you maybe, to preserve human flesh, we could do something similar? Well, if salt works for fish, what will work for humans? What sort of mineral or what sort of rock or element would help preserve human flesh? If it's salt for fish, we need something better. How about gold? And the way that you could find gold, but it's hard and rare and expensive, if you could somehow take some substance like iron or something that is steel or whatever that's less valuable and turn it into golds chemically, then that would be a way to accumulate gold, and we could use that to preserve human flesh. So that's kind of just an interesting tangent of Taoism, that there was this small offshoot group that kind of broke away from the basic ideas, and they started practicing alchemy. And the idea there is to take something that is cheap and abundant, like iron, and do some chemical process, transform it into gold, and then use that, rub it on yourself, or maybe can put it in little flakes and drink it. Just like I think there's like a vodka or some kind of alcohol where there's literally gold flakes at the bottom that you can consume, and they're in such small quantity that it's not harmful, I guess. Not for me so much. So that's the alchemists, the Taoists who do practice alchemy. All right, we'll stop it there. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next lecture or